So it's been 5 years since Colorado became the first state to legalize recreational marijuana, infusing the drug into politics and everyday life. The New York Times article Reefer Madness or Pot Paradise, the surprising legacy of the place where legal weed began, examines the impacts of legalization on the state that we're seeing now. The author of that article is New York Times national correspondent Jack Healy, joining me now from Boulder, Colorado. Thanks for joining me. This was a really interesting article.
Yeah, thanks so much.
So I go back, 5 years, and I think about all the concerns that were popping up when Colorado was about to legalize marijuana, especially the kids. As my dad would say, the kids are going to start smoking those funny cigarettes, and they won't go to school, and there'll be, concerns about people driving while under the influence, and everyone will become sort of a layabout. But what have you learned about the impacts of this legalization of recreational marijuana, particularly on the young people of Colorado?
Well, I think your dad's concerns were really reflected in the concerns of public health officials and doctors and everybody else who had, worries about this. But what we're seeing is a really complicated and nuanced kind of picture 5 years out. And one of the big takeaways is that kids actually, according to the best state numbers that we can find, they're not smoking more. Basically, you have not seen some sort of like huge escalation in youth use. That said, there are a lot of families and a lot of educators and health officials, who think that there's been sort of like a cultural proliferation and that, kids that I talked to said that when they walk down the street to school, they're sort of growing up in this era where they're walking by pot shops, that are on their regular route to school every day or on their route to an after school practice or something like that. And they're sort of just growing up in an era where things are really normal and that the kids who are doing pot are doing it in different ways than maybe when you and I were younger. They're getting it from older siblings who are buying it in dispensaries, or they're using vaporizers to do it, or they're getting their hands on edibles and things like that. And those are real concerns, I think, for public health folks and educators. But overall, we haven't seen sort of like some dramatic, spike in youth use. Adults are using more, though.
Also, one of the conversations happening 5 years ago was the criminal justice system and the number of people who were behind bars because of marijuana-related crimes, sometimes low amounts of marijuana. And the idea was that this would sort of fix that, what many people saw as an injustice. You have this really great graph as part of the article where you show, marijuana arrests from 2012 to 2017 separated by race. And what you really see is, in particular, Black teenagers. There's that graph, this huge spike in Black teenagers being nabbed for marijuana-related arrests, and then things just plummet. There's still a discrepancy when it comes to the races, but there's it looks like things are equaling out a little bit.
Yeah, we are seeing a lot of low-level arrests basically vanishing, especially for adults, because if you're an adult, it is perfectly legal to have a small amount of marijuana, to consume it, to buy it, to grow it, that sort of things. If you are a child or up to 21 years of age, you still can't do it. I went to a juvenile courtroom in Denver a few weeks ago to see sort of like who the churn of people, ending up in court for small possession charges was. And still most of the faces who were ending up in that courtroom were Hispanic and African-American kids. So there still is this racial disparity, but at the same time, those numbers have really plunged and we're not seeing as many people actually ending up in the criminal justice system.
And now that marijuana is available legally for whatever you want to use it for, has this sort of put an end to drug cartels and gang activity?
That was one of the sort of pie in the sky promises of the pro-legalization folks, but we have not seen an end to cartel activity. In fact, some law enforcement folks would say that it has actually had a perverse effect of increasing it, because you have a lot of criminal organizations that are using private homes in the suburbs, rural expanses where there's not a lot of folks out there, to illegally grow huge quantities of marijuana that then get shipped out of state to Florida, New York, other places on the East Coast where it's not as legal as it is here. So there are places where people will absolutely just take over an entire house and grow marijuana in every square inch they can, sometimes even cutting off the electrical meters. So there's not a suspicious, spike in the meter reading, for folks who are out there looking for signs of illegal grows, because it's still legal to grow a number of plants in your own home if you're a Colorado resident, but you can't sort of be off growing hundreds and hundreds of plants like some people are in these illegal grows.
Right. So the article, Reefer Madness or Pot Paradise, it's in the New York Times. I think it's a great snapshot. You also talk about sort of the health impacts, the change in political conversations in regards to marijuana that we can't get to, but I think people should really check it out. Jack Healy, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much.